Hi, guys. Welcome to Lights Out Inc.'s first interview of author K.A. Huff. We're here to talk about Ground Control, which actually is released Friday. Show us a picture of that beautiful book.
Isn't that gorgeous?
Behold it. It is so beautiful. Can we see the back? Can we see the back?
Yes,
Look how fancy. Oh
it
my.
is so pretty.
Yeah. So who
Yes.
did your cover? If you don't, that's the first question I'll ask you.
The amazing KM West.
Yeah.
She threw it together. She said, I have some ideas. I don't know what you like, but what do you think? And I'm like, it is everything I dreamed of and more. Like just first time she got it. I don't know if she even changed anything after the first thing she made because it was just so absolutely perfect. So
Yeah, it's
so
beautiful.
pleased. It's a human story set in space. So it's the story of a trailing spouse named Sarah who has always followed along behind her husband as he's done his career thing all over the world. She's just picked up and moved and made a life wherever she goes. And how the story starts is that he comes home and she's like, "Okay, where are we going this time?" And he says, "We're going to Mars." And the premise is that they're going someplace that they can't come back from. So the Mars thing kind of happened by accident, but the whole idea is in this day and age, everywhere you go, the world is so small, you're going to be able to get home and communicate and run into people again wherever you go. But I wanted a place that it's a one way trip. And so far, with all the capabilities, it is only a one way trip to Mars, and it will be for 20, 30 years still. So, yeah, so that's kind of set in the near future where there's a small colony out in Mars. And it's the story of her kind of letting go of what she has on Earth and then trying to figure out who she really is and who she wants to be and kind of what defines her. So,
It's amazing. It's one of my favorite books that I
yeah.
think I've ever read. Although I want to just go ahead and record myself now as the I Hate Grant fan club member number one. But anyway, we're going to ignore that. That aside, the book, yeah, it's very surprising. It's not what you expect typically. There are science fiction elements in it, and they're very well written. They're very well
Mhm,
documented. Like you did your research, and I can see that
I
clearly.
did. Well, I'm currently living in London. I'm Canadian, but I trailed my husband as a spouse to London, and I found myself in the middle of this community of expats where there's all these incredible women, and they're doctors, they're lawyers, they're chiropractors, and speech therapists, and all of them left that behind to follow their husbands to London. They're all trailing spouses, and I was like, well, like how do you let go of something so amazing? And she's like, well, it's a new adventure. And so Sarah is kind of parts of all of that. My mom was a trailing spouse as well. My dad was in the Navy, and I have accidentally also become one. So it's kind of the inspiration was kind of like finding your way when you don't have what defines you anymore. So I see myself as more than a wife, more than a mother. I'd rather have my own thing, and so that was one of the inspirations. Secondly, I love space. I love space travel. Um, Colonel Chris Hadfield, he's a Canadian astronaut, and he was the commander of the ISS um, in, I'm going to get the year wrong, but early 2000s, I think, or early 20, maybe 2010, 2011. But he was up on the ISS running the show. And he did this incredible job, not just for Canada, but for kids everywhere, where he would do YouTube videos and he had a live social feed that he would do experiments and people would send questions and he would just kind of introduce like, this is what it's like to live in space. And so that really blew my mind. He recorded a song live in space with the Bare Naked Ladies and a choir. Like he's just the coolest guy. And his wife, again, trailing spouse, and she's incredible and has supported him and done everything as well throughout his whole career. So I guess those are my first two. And my third is my husband, because he is not Grant in the book, but he is a scientist and he's very ambitious and very very keen on growing and exploring and trying new things. So all sorts of different characters, different kinds of books, like from Stephen King, anecdotal. Um, I love the absurd. So something like if Neil Gaiman and David Sedaris had a baby, that for me that would be the most incredible thing because you get that like the fantasy and the
Epic
fiction.
personal life. But go ahead. Yeah, you're right.
so so I love things like that where there's like unexpected twists and just like the world is so funny and people are so funny. So I don't like books that take themselves too seriously. Um, but yeah, for my own writing, it's I wouldn't say write what you know because when I sat down to write this, I had no idea about Mars or space or bacterial diseases, which if you read the book, you learn a bit about
Don't spoil
bacterial. Don't-
it. Don't spoil
Did I
it.
say bacterial diseases? I have two. One was almost complete, and my publisher told me that it wasn't a good fit right now. So, so thank you for that.
Did you really say
um,
that? I don't believe she did. I don't know what's going
yeah.
on.
So I wrote almost a full novel about a. It's just a not a traditional women's fiction, but the more I read about women's fiction, maybe it is. But it has no science fiction basis to it. It's just a little. It's a story about relationships, and it's set on Earth, and it's set in a dog park. So that's in the wings. That's going to be put aside for a few years, and I'll dust it off and make it better in a few years. But right now, I'm working on. I hate the word sequel, but it's I-
Like
at
a
this point
continuation.
there are characters in common with ground control, um, but that can still change. The ground control is about these people going off to a colony, and I wanted to take a look at the colony as it stands, where it's been like the scientists, the engineers, the people that are building from the ground up this society, this colony, um, and what happens when suddenly people show up that aren't. I hate to use the word useful, but useful. So, like, if families show up to help inhabit this new civilization, um, competing for resources, there's going to be jealousy. There's going to be fighting for everything. So, I kind of want to explore how that would kind of pan out.
Can you just go ahead and get
Yeah,
that to us ASAP?
yeah. I was like, I'm typing. I'm typing. Yeah.
What you think about the term women's fiction itself, and
Ooh,
what does that
I
mean?
despise it. I despise it because it tends to be fluffier. It tends to be more simplistic. There's always a love story. There's always these certain elements. And as a woman who reads fiction, um, like David Sedaris writes women's fiction, Neil Gaiman writes women's fiction, Stephen King writes women's fiction. They write characters. They write stories that people want to read, and um, it's like I know that there has to be a genre defined because people like having knowing
Classification.
what to expect, knowing what they want to read. But as a writer, why would I want to write something that somebody's already done? Why would I want to stay in one specific genre? Because if women's fiction is this, that's already out there. Why would I want to do that? So I don't like the term women's fiction. I think we're tossing around femlit as an alternative. So female characters are strong. They're active parts of the plot. They're not just the tag along and the sidekick or the elf beside the warrior. Like it's I think it's important. I've got daughters and when they write stories, they write about themselves going on adventures and that's what it should be. But I just wish there was a better term for it. And really, what's the alternative? What is men's fiction? Do they have their own thing?
There you go.
What is men's fiction? So
I think it's
yeah.
pretty much just like detective fiction where like he sits at a desk and he smokes. No, is that not it? I don't know.
No, no.
Hero guy that knocks down buildings with a car. I don't know what his fiction is either, to be honest. But for process, it'll be like a two-part question for the last question that I'll ask you. Process for writers who are coming up or looking to get published, who are they're trying to get to the stage that you're at right now, where you're about to drop your first book in a day.
Mhm.
So, what what advice would you give them for the writing process and how to stay focused?
Oh, so for me, do I have my book? I've got all my little writing things. I advise a deadline. And so I did NaNoWriMo for my first challenge. It's November 1st to 30th, and the goal of it is to write 50,000 words, a 50,000 word novella. So it doesn't count as a novel in theory, but a novella in 30 days. And there's a website and it's nonprofit. And it's just kind of a community motivational thing. If you make it to 50,000 words by November 30th at midnight, whatever your time zone is, you win. I didn't win anything. I just wrote 50,000 words of a book in a month. And they're just like, but that's huge. And then when I finished, I'm like, yes, that is huge. And so, first advice is write it. Make yourself a deadline, make it a true deadline. Tell people about it because that way you have accountability. Because you could be like I was up to that point when I was like, I'm going to write a book. And I have many, many half started manuscripts. I have many collections of essays that never got finished. But by me saying publicly on social media and to all my friends and family, I'm doing this, and I was so uncomfortable and so scared to try it, and then to actually make it, and at the last day, get my I think I did 50,053 words by
Wow.
midnight on that day, and I was just like, "Yeah." So, the first step is to do it and to stick with it, and then I put it away, and I was like, "Well, what now?" And I ran into a friend who I didn't know was an author, and she was just like, "Okay." She's like, "So polish it up and publish it." I'm like, "Well, that's kind of beyond me. Like I wrote a book and that's good enough." And she's like, "No." And the fact that I knew somebody then that had published, I was like, so it's actually possible. Like this can happen. And she was really, really kind, really helpful. She writes YA books and she's just phenomenal. Um, and so then I took it out and I looked at it and I was like, you know what, maybe there is something here. So the novel writing took 30 days. The cleaning up took 5 months of 6 hours a day. Luckily, we were homeschooling, so I was stuck inside anyway. But I was able to pull it apart, rewrite it, cut huge parts, put in things that made it make sense. So it took another 5 months after that till it was ready to query. So I would say like those are the two phases, like write the damn thing, and then secondly, like fix it. First draft was really no good, but it got to a point that
I don't think anyone
somebody was willing to
yeah.
look at it. And then after that, then I got the publishing deal and I was like, great. So we're good. But they're like, oh, no, 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 no. We're ripping you apart again. I'm like, but
What?
you liked it. They're like, well, we like parts of it. So that phase was another 5 months, another 6, 7, 8 months. Like it was again long.
4
So
months.
it's
What? It's not me you're talking to. What?
no, you're just staring at the screen. So it's a long, arduous process, but I'm gonna say it's so worthwhile. I opened up my box yesterday and I was just like, I did this. It's just lovely. So I'm really pleased with it. I'm really happy. It's been a really, really good experience. And so I would like the other one that I wrote that is shelved was a NaNoWriMo as well. Because like to carve out the time to be creative, it's really hard to do, to have the dedication, motivation to see it through unless you've got somebody waiting for it. It's really, really hard. And like anybody that's written anything, like hats off. Like I didn't think after I did the 30 days, I was like, woohoo. I didn't think there would still be another
Oh,
what 9 months of work to get it polished enough to publish then. But it's a process, but it's worthwhile and it can be done. I owe my beta readers some big apologies because I sent I'm like, what do you think? And that was probably
yeah, 100
like
pages.
probably two days after I finished the NaNoWriMo. I was like, try this giant chunk of my consciousness on a page. And yeah, so
I'm sure they're really excited to read your next one.
like, did it get better?
Like,
Just give it a try. Don't give up. Um, and the whole write what you know thing, I tried writing a bunch of short stories, some flash fiction, some poetry, and submitting it all over the place. And then I started to think about like what kind of short stories I like to read and what kind of flash fiction I like to read. And I realized that I don't like to read short stories or flash fiction. So why am I trying to write it? And that's when I was like, you know what I really like? I like books, and I like books about XYZ. And so, kind of figuring out what you like is important. I have a collection like is important. I have a collection of how to write books, how to write books. That they're fantastic for procrastinating. So I've got all these resources that I can always come back to, and if I'm stuck, I can just pick up a book on how to write a book, and it makes me feel better. So use your resources, use deadlines, sound it off of people you know, people that like you, and like they'll be honest, hopefully, and yeah, and just give it a try because if I can do it, like,
That's can you tell everybody what your social media channels are where they can find your work online? I know you have a blog.
I do. So I've got a few. So I'm on Twitter at Kapowfit, Kapowfit. I'm on Instagram at Karen Huff Writes. My website is karenhuffwrites.com. Um, and my blog is on there. And I also have a separate blog that's a little bit less professional. And it's damnitkaren.com. So yeah.